Welcome to the STARS program, seniors taking active roles in society. And now, here's your host, ANITA FINLEY.
So, I'm ANITA FINLEY, and this is Boomer Times Radio, and I choose the best interviewees. And today we have one which, of course, the information that we present isn't always joyful, but hopefully it's helpful. And we find the best people to tell us the facts. You know, it's the real facts and what people should be careful about. And so today we have a great guy. His name is William SARUBBI, and he is a trial attorney with Senior Justice Law Firm. And it's not always pleasant for some of the cases that he has, but at least there is someone there who can help you. And that's why we loved having him and his other attorneys on our radio show from time to time. So good morning, Will. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, ANITA. Thank you for always having me on the show. It's always a pleasure to see you and the team.
Well, an attractive man goes a long way. We have you on Facebook Live.
Thank you.
And I wanted to just share something. I recently had a physician on the show, and he was saying, we talked about heart failure and cancer being, of course, reasons that elders usually pass away. But the third thing he said was hospitals, and I was shocked. I said, why is that? He said, well, because hospitals, there are too many errors. It had nothing to do with infection. It was errors. And he said, you must have an advocate with you. And I think that's very important in your line of business.
It's extremely important, and the doctor's name is slipping me at this point, but I know that you said that you had a really, really good conversation with him. And that is something that we can always be on the lookout for. Dr. Jaffer. And that's a good point, because a fair amount of our business is shifted towards nursing home abuse in the facilities here in the community. However, hospitals are neglecting our elderly because of known complications and risks. One of the most prime examples that we see are hospital-acquired pressure ulcers, where a resident is simply staying in bed too long on a pressure point, which is now developing a wound or causing a wound to develop, which is easily remedied by just turning and repositioning the resident. Something as simple as a nurse or a staff member coming in every 2 hours or more to alleviate pressure, because someone may have an internal injury where they just simply can't do it themselves. So that's why we see, just as the doctor noted in your radio interview, that these risks are starting to pop up more, and these cases that we're seeing on a regular basis are starting to increase.
You also talked about having wrong medication given to you, and I had actually happened when my husband was in a rehab center. That happened, and I got it, but it's ridiculous.
It is ridiculous.
And what I think happens is there's too much pressure on the staff, not enough staff for the kind of the quantity of people.
You hit the nail on the head, ANITA, and a lot of it comes from the top bottom, because our law firm is not predicated, and nor do we wake up every day to single out an individual health provider or a staff member, because we as a community respect hospitals, because as soon as an emergency happens, they are on the front lines. We respect that, and we cherish that. However, I believe that it's more of a systematic failure, where these individuals and professionals are being hired, and they're just not given the resources to meet the needs of the residents and the patients. So that is something that happens a fair amount of times, ANITA. We see that it's really not the negligent staff member, it's the resources that are pulled from that hospital that can be given to make the care better in many circumstances.
Yeah, and of course this happens. We always assume it's going to happen in a rehab center or in a in a nursing home, but to have it happen now in hospitals is very worrisome. But carrying on with this, so let's just talk about some of the cases that you've had. Let's just go through, and of course you're never going to name anybody, but what could have been prevented when you went in there and you saw it immediately? You said, well, I can't understand why they did this. They shouldn't have done it, and then this wouldn't have happened.
It's a great question, and I'll go ahead and start with the theme, and keeping the theme with hospitals and hospital-acquired pressure ulcers. And for those that have heard us before, want to welcome them back and hope that we can reach more as we talk about these issues on Facebook Live and on the radio. But just to kind of give some background about our firm, we are one of a handful of firms in the state of Florida that specialize in this area. It's very important that you hire an attorney to seek out that lives and breathes these types of issues every single day, not just, it's very different from a standard personal injury attorney who serve a different purpose than what we're trying to do. We focus on nursing home neglect, assisted living, wrongful death, and hospital-acquired pressure ulcers, such as the case that I'll tell you about right now. I have an elderly woman who was at a local hospital here in Palm Beach County. She went in with internal injuries. She had to have a stomach procedure done on her abdomen, which when that happens, you become very vulnerable and you have to be in an intensive care unit for several days. And when that happens and you're incapacitated, you really rely on the staff to make sure that you're not just lying in bed all day. You have to be able to turn and reposition, because otherwise what can happen is called a bed sore, and that's simply a wound that breaks on the skin and develops because too much pressure being applied. A lot of times we see them on the backside of our residents, and it could happen on the lower extremities, but we normally see it on the tailbone and the backside. And in this particular case, she was left in bed for several days, and this could happen in just a matter of hours, let alone days. And it developed to the largest stage that is possible, which is a stage 4 bed sore. And she still has this wound on her body 2 years later. And unfortunately, she's not improving, and it's possible that she may die from the bed sore.
And there are people who have amputations because of things like this. Now, I just not suggest, have they tried hyperbaric oxygen yet?
Of course they have. They have.
And that still hasn't helped. So it was so deep it went into the bone, didn't it? And that's what happens a lot.
It's exactly right. And what I like to use an analogy to help our viewers understand this, because it's very simple to understand when you put it into context. Once the horse is out of the barn, so to speak, it's very hard to corral that animal back into its home, into its shelter. With a wound, once the skin starts to break down and to deteriorate, and once it has, once it's receptive to infections, it's impossible to really make sure that wound improves back to normal, which is why we're so concerned with the preventative measures that are there, because they know, the staff, the hospital, whether it's a nursing home or a hospital or somewhere in between, they know that these types of issues can be prevented if we just identify the resident and make sure that they're being turned and repositioned frequently, because it is preventable. It's just not all hospitals have the same awareness, and that's why we're trying to bring awareness to the community on these issues.
I think maybe what you should do is invent a flag, that when someone has this problem, the flag goes up.
Right.
And then when they fix it, the flag goes down, but then it comes back up again in an hour.
Right.
Right? And when the staff sees the flag up, they better do something.
Agreed. And I wish that we had a simple example like that, Anita, but this is why we take the time out of our day to make sure we bring awareness to the community, because if we can prevent just one person from getting that type of injury, which is lifelong, it doesn't happen over a period of weeks. It does not resolve. It typically is something that lasts until the day that they die. And it's very, very, very painful. And our clients are living through that every day. So if we can prevent one person from getting that type of injury, it's worth it.
So people who are listening to the show, and I just want to give them your phone number so that if they have had this problem, they're having the problem, or they can help in some other way, let's do that. So we're going to have you call their phone number. Well, let's go to their website, which is seniorjustice.com. Seniorjustice.com. And then if you want to make that phone call, it's 561-717-0817. That's 717-0817. And my guest is William SARUBBI II.
Yes.
He's a trial attorney, senior justice law firm. I gather your father is somewhere around here. And
he is the first.
He is the first, right? Is there a third?
Hopefully. I was just married, and my wife and I are already talking about names, so hopefully that's on the discussion.
So
list.
if you have a little girl, you name it Willow.
Yeah.
Something else. Well, anyway.
We'll certainly see.
Right. So, something that you kind of were breathing hard about when we started talking before the show, because your next article in Boomer Times will be on this. And by the way, they do write an incredible article every month in Boomer Times. There are very few places that an article like this can take this kind of an effect, because you don't want to put it in the Sun Sentinel or into the Miami Herald. Right. I mean, this needs to go in a place where seniors are reading it, and hopefully they will read it and say, okay, if that ever happens to me, I'm going to know what to do, right?
Exactly right.
Okay.
And that's why we want to make sure that not only are we bringing awareness on the radio, we want to make sure for those that are more inclined to read the articles, and there are so many great articles in the Boomer Times section, so very informative. And we do like to write at least 1 or 2 write-ups every month.
Yeah, right. So let's talk about what this next issue and because I was surprised when you told me about that.
Right. Well, Anita, we typically would talk about wrongful death cases, pressure ulcers. We've covered a lot of topics in the last couple months, but some of the cases that we've been seeing lately are really discouraging, because right now in our communities there are independent living facilities that are popping up left and right, and it's important for a loved one who has someone who may need supervision, who just can't be by themselves in a condo or in their house, or if there's a loved one who's taken care or who has actually brought in a loved one to their home and just can't physically supervise them and take care of them on their own, and they're starting to make that decision, do I put my loved one in a facility, but I don't want to put them in a nursing home, or I don't want to put them in an assisted living facility, and they start to look towards independent living facilities, which, if I could, out of the 3, it's the lowest on the scale of supervision. Independent really does mean independent, and they have you sign these resident agreements that we don't prevent falls, we don't prevent serious injuries. This is essentially a landlord-tenant agreement between you and the facility, who is making several thousands of dollars off of your loved one for this independent community. Normally they're beautiful. It's
like a hotel. They provide the food, they provide the activities, transportation, and that's what it's supposed to be.
Exactly, and it's nothing more than that. And for those that are marketed towards and that are seeking out these independent communities, sometimes in the sales department meetings when they're having these discussions with the representatives of the facilities, promises are made. And when something tragic happens, such as a resident who may not have full dementia but is on its way to having some sort of cognitive impairment, starts to wander and he or she falls and breaks their hip, the first question is, well, what happened here? And a lot of times we are greeted with the hands up defense that you knew that this was just an independent living facility. If you really needed someone to watch your loved one, they should have been in an assisted living facility or a nursing home. And that is very disheartening for individuals that are really just trying to put their loved one in a safe environment. So it's very important that we're honest with ourselves, that you talk with people that are affiliated with our law firm. We're always open 24/7. If you even have a question about appropriateness for your resident, or if you have an issue about, I think that my loved one is in an independent living facility, but they're starting to regress, mentally, physically, is it more appropriate for them to be in a higher care facility? We are here to help those, members of the community make those tough decisions, because once a tragedy happens, it's impossible to kind of undo that based on the duty and the standard of care that these independent living facilities have versus nursing homes and hospitals that have a much higher duty of care for supervision and making sure that they prevent preventable injuries.
Well, it's interesting that you should bring this up, because my mother was in the early 2000s. And my mother went to a very upscale independent retirement community in Fort Lauderdale. Okay. And I would visit her frequently. And you can't tell when a visit, you're sitting having dinner, what's going on. But they make very close friends. And one of the friends took me aside and said, I think your mother needs a little extra help. She's forgetting this. She's not doing this. Sometimes she's soiling her pants. So what we were able to do, though, which we did, is she had an aide who came in 4 hours a day. Right. And then it needed more. And then she still had the aide because she had friends there. She was so comfortable there. Right. She did, while she was there with an aide in her apartment, fall and break her hip. And that happens because you can't hold someone like a baby all the time. Right. And then once she broke her hip, things kind of went down. Then they wanted to put her in assisted living. And that wasn't working well. So we then took her out to a home, her own apartment with a 24-hour person.
Right.
So you brought up something that is so true, because what they do, the independent living, they do make this very glamorous. But what I think they have a responsibility, and maybe some do this, and I'm not sure, when they themselves see things deteriorating, they should call the family. And they should say, I think you need to relook at where your mother is or your father is, and we do have a place it could be easier, or it's not appropriate anymore. Wouldn't you like that?
In an ideal world, that's what gets us up out of bed every day, Anita, because we want to be able to raise the standard of care to that an independent living facility that I just described to you is essentially taking the stance that they're a landlord and you're a tenant. We're not going to bother you. If something happens, it's really you're running at your own risk. But they, likewise, having a community of individuals like this, knowing that as we get older, things start to deteriorate, potentially our body, our mind, potentially at the same time. These are happening in real time. And those warning signs that I like to call them, how your mom was, I believe it was a friend that said, you know what, Anita, I think that mom is starting to lose a little bit of her memory. She's starting to forget things. Those are warning signs that we have to really pay attention to, because unfortunately, your mom suffered a traumatic injury, and once you break your hip, regardless of how old you are, it's all downhill from there. And it's important that I believe that the independent living facilities are honest with their residents, that if they are starting to show signs that they need more assistance, you would expect someone in that position, in the best position possible, to call the family members and say, gosh, I really think that this is better suited for a higher care facility. But of course, the financial gain that is happening behind the scenes is something that can't be ignored, something that we've explored. But right now, we're really trying to make sure that the Florida legislature is focusing on these issues, because Michael and I, my law partner, have talked about raising the standard of care in multiple facilities, nursing homes, assisted living facilities, and now independent living facilities is on our radar, and we will make sure that we do everything within our power as a community to continue to raise that standard so that our seniors are protected.
I love this. I love the fact that young men like you, who you have your families and you care about this. A lot of people don't care. So let me just tell everybody, you've been listening to Will J. SARUBBI II. He's a trial attorney with Senior Justice Law Firm, and they're located in Boca Raton, but they will handle anything. I think you'll handle anything in Florida, won't you?
We do, and we actually have offices opening up in New York, in Philadelphia, so we've expanded into other states as well. I would encourage the viewers to reach out to us.
Yes.
The consultation is always free.
Oh, that's excellent. Thank you for bringing that up. The website is seniorjustice.com, and the phone number is 561-717-0817. And I just really believe that the information you're hearing here could save someone's life, and that's why you come here, and I know that. Well, let's just continue. So, there are a lot of senior, let's call them, first of all, you call it independent living, but it's made for seniors. Right. So that, in essence, says that, all right, it's not like going to a condo and you're just living in an apartment.
Right.
There's a certain responsibility, meals, activities. There's certain, they provide a nurse maybe that comes in once a month, once a week, right. And they do medication reminders. There's a lot of things that these independent communities now have done.
Right.
So with that in mind, it follows through that maybe when they're bringing people in, they ought to have, like they do with the assisted living, that if we're independent, you have number 1, independent number 2, independent number 3, right?
Right.
So they're not quite ready for assisted living, but there are things that they need.
Right.
And that may be something you can consider.
That's a great example. If we could, someone who is admitted today might be different than they are even tomorrow or even a few weeks from now, because these changes happen so rapidly. And these independent living facilities do offer a lot of good for our elderly, because, sitting at home is not productive. We want to encourage them to be active. They have friends like your mom. I'm sure that your mom enjoyed being around her friends, and you don't want to disrupt that living community that they've built, those relationships that they cherish. But we also have to be honest with ourselves that when we're admitted, it may not be the same condition that we are a few weeks from now, a few years from now. And I think that it's important that we consider that in real time, similar to what you talked about, Anita.
Will, and they brag about a lot of the people living there for 5 and 10 years, and they do. Right. And some do live there because what they're doing is very good. But it's that extra something that you have to be able to examine, and they have to have a relationship with the family because, as I said, even though I went there a few times a week, a lot of family members don't come down but maybe once a month if they live afar. They can't see that when they just come there because everything's happy, and it's amazing how an older adult for that visit jumps up and puts on the best face. They don't, how are you doing, Mom? Oh, I'm great, I'm fine. They never say anything. I'm sure. So it's it's the responsibility of the management of an independent home, independent community, right, to do more than just provide the food and provide, the activities. They need to realize that they're in a community of people over 65, and we know that many of these people go in these communities average age 83.
Right. So
you're already starting with people who are older. And a lot of us are at home and we have problems,
exactly.
But there especially, it's a congregate of that.
Right.
So I think that you're really doing a great service with what you're doing, because I haven't really heard about this before you came on the show. I always think of assisted living or hospitals or nursing homes, but now we're really going to talk about independent living.
Right, and it's important, and I always try to bring new material for not only for our viewers but for you, Anita, because I know that you're in the community and you're talking with health professionals and other attorneys as well. It really, if I could summarize this in just a few sentences, it's just important that when placing your loved one in a community with the options that are available to you, our natural instinct is to fade away or to turn away from a higher care facility because perhaps your loved one fell once or twice at the house. Maybe their dementia is starting to progress, or they're starting to experience forgetfulness. And our natural instinct is to start at step one, the independent living communities. But we want to make sure that we caution our viewers to explore assisted living facilities as well as nursing homes, because I believe that they will find out that the standard of care is much higher at those facilities, because God forbid something terrible happens at an independent living facility, your legal rights for a wrongful death or for any injury whatsoever is much, much lower than an assisted living facility and a nursing home. So we want to prevent those preventable tragedies from happening, and making sure that they get the most attention and supervision that they deserve to meet their needs.
I think what this show is awareness. Dr. Mark Gannon, I know him, and he's an optometrist that specializes in low vision. He has all the most wonderful gadgets for people who they can see much better, big televisions. He's been a genius in this field for many years, and he's watching, and I just saw that. And
welcome,
also
Mark.
now, Dr. Gannon, he's someone that if you know of someone that needs better vision, he can certainly help with that. And then Seth Levy, and he's in the field. I believe that he has mobile units that they, health units that they bring around to the condos, and also that he helps people.
Extremely beneficial.
Right, it is beneficial, but there are always the difficulties of it not being perfect, and what you have to have is almost like a little someone on your shoulder,
right,
watching and trying to help in some way. But if all else fails, let's call a lawyer to see what really happened. Because if you don't, it's not like, a lot of people say, I don't want to get a lawyer involved, and then what you're doing is you're throwing a lot of other people under the bus, aren't you?
It depends. It really depends.
If it's because the facility is not doing the right thing, then it's just who's next.
That's certainly one way to look at it, Anita, because, a lot of our clients are hesitant to pursue claims because their loved one had such a good experience there and maybe not such a great ending. And we've had to turn away a lot of cases because they just are not prepared to go and pursue a lawsuit. And a lot of times we think of lawsuit, we think of trial, we think of public, we think of a long drawn-out process. A lot of our settlements are done within the matter of 12 months, and they can be done confidentially. So there are viable options. The most important thing is that if something happens, it's important to understand what your legal rights are, and if anything, you walk away more educated about the process so that you and your loved ones and your family can make an informed decision about what happened or what didn't really happen, because we investigate these claims so many times, and it's not always clear-cut. My mom fell in the bathroom, she broke her hip, and she unfortunately passed away. Sometimes we have to do some digging and investigating to find out that what the story was, that mom had someone next to her and she simply was, just fell on her own. We find out a lot of times she was dropped, or that she was alone, and that she was found completely alone for 30 minutes or for even longer. So it's important to make sure that you get the facts, and then once we get the facts, we could really move forward with making a decision if it's better to pursue a case or to simply not pursue a case.
Right, and so you have a lot of work to do, and I think you're being nice, and your other associates you're so nice that I think that it catches people off guard too, because you're there to really help and not just to pat them on the back, but if you see something, you smell it, you feel it, you know it.
Right.
Well, anyway, Will, it's been wonderful. You're always great guest to have here, and I just remember to tell everybody again, Senior Justice Law Firm, and the phone number's 561-717-0817, and the law firm website is seniorjustice.com. Thank you, Will.
Anita, thank you for having me on.